Hello everyone, and welcome to Lowne Aerospace, KSP 2. In this series, I'll be embarking on a spacebound quest to unlock the tech tree in Kerbal Space Program 2's exploration mode in a way that should hopefully be easy to follow along if you're new to the game, and I'll try and explain what I'm doing as I do it and why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it as best I can. So first things first, here I am setting up my campaign. I'm leaving all difficulty values at their default settings, chosen a snazzy looking agency flag, and set my agency colours. I've also disabled cadet orientation, but if you're new to KSP then you may want to leave this on. It can be disabled anytime and it will give you extra on-screen hints and tips while you play. Anyway, now that's all done and set, here we are at the Space Center. There are a few buildings here, the training center, which contains all the in-game tutorials, so I'm not going to bother visiting this one myself, but it is worth visiting if you're brand new. We also have mission control. This will be the first place we'll go. It's where you get your science missions from. Then we've got the tracking station and the R&D facility, which we'll touch on when we need them. And finally, the vehicle assembly building, where you assemble your vehicles. So, cool. Anyway, first things first, we're going to go to Mission Control. Mission Control is where you can accept contracts, which are the best way to earn science points, and you need science points to progress through the game. Right now, we just have one mission to pick from, launch a rocket to an altitude of 10 kilometers. So let's track the mission and then build the rocket. In order to build the rocket, we're going to go to the vehicle assembly building. We can click the very handy VAB shortcut in Mission Control, or if you want, you can press escape, go back to the Kerbal Space Center and click on the VAB that way. So here we are in the VAB. Building rockets in KSP is basically like stacking Lego. You will generally build rockets top down. So we'll start by placing a command pod for our pilot to sit in. We'll add a parachute to this so that it can land safely, and then we'll add a decoupler below it. Decouplers allow the separation of two pieces of a spacecraft and will be needed for detaching spent stages. Pressing the spacebar activates a stage, so right now our rocket has two. The first spacebar press will fire the decoupler, the second will activate the parachute. We do need a means to fly though, so let's add some fuel tanks. We're going to add 3 tanks, like this, and add the one engine to the bottom that we have at our disposal. And you can see when it's added, it becomes the first stage. Finally, I'm going to add 4 fins to the bottom of the stack in 4-way symmetry. You can cycle through symmetry by pressing either X or clicking the little symmetry button. Now going forward, I'm not going to talk much more in depth about how you actually build rockets in this game. I'd suggest having a play around with making stuff. It is part of the fun of KSP. Anyway, with our very first rocket built, let's go to the launch pad and get ready to launch. Before we launch though, I want to draw your attention to this flashing blue tab to the left of the screen, that little titration flask. It's flashing blue because it's notifying us that there is science available. We can click it and run a crew observation from our pilot, Bill, from the launch pad, so probably not going to get that much science points. And with that out the way, let's launch by pressing space. Get it? You press space to go to space. Now our only objective for this flight is to reach 10 kilometers in altitude. So we're just going to go straight up. I'm actually going to use the control key to reduce our thrust to about 50% because we really don't need to be going that fast this low in the atmosphere. And you can see that reflected by the green gauge to the left of the screen. While we're cruising our way to 10 kilometers, we can press that science button again to net some more crew observations. I glossed over this earlier because I kind of wanted to get the launch underway, but in addition to the science contracts, the other way you unlock science points is by running science experiments. But there we are, we have passed the 10-kilometer point, and so now we can earn science points from completing the contract. We have to make sure the rocket lands first though, so I'm actually going to use these keys at the bottom to put ourselves onto 3 times time warp. Functions exactly like how you'd expect. You can accelerate through time because some of the journeys you'll be doing in this game will last many years, if not decades, or even centuries. So you need to be able to accelerate through time. So that's what these buttons do. Anyway, as you can see, we have staged the decoupler, so now the capsule is falling on its own. The reason why it was important to separate the fuel tanks and engine was because we've only got one little parachute at the top of this capsule, and while it's sufficient to, slow the capsule down and ensure it can land safely, it might have struggled to do this with the added weight of the engine and fuel tank, so we just dropped them while we didn't need them. And there we are, we have successfully landed in a bit of an awkward spot, but we have landed and survived, which is all that matters. Before we actually recover the vessel though, I'm actually going to get Bill on an EVA because look, The titration flask is flashing again, indicating there is science to do, but we have to go outside first. So we can hover our mouse over Bill's little portrait and then click the exit button, and that gets him on EVA. We can then do a surface survey experiment, which is the same as take a surface sample in Kerbal Space Program 1, although this time there's a little animation. Bit confusing though, given that he's dipping the sample tube into solid concrete, but who am I to judge, eh? We're going to get him back on the vessel, and then we're going to press escape. This gives us a list of options. Now we need to press recover vessel. Do not press revert to VAB or revert to launch. Revert in this context means rewind everything you just did, so you'll lose all of your progress. It's recover. That's the button that we want. The revert buttons are for when you inevitably have some sort of disaster and need to rewind back to the launch. Anyway, here we are back at mission control. We can submit our launch a rocket contract and wait for Dr. Kerry Kerman to do her thing, and there we are. 25 science unlocked. Now we have a new mission available. This time, leave the atmosphere. Before we set about doing this though, we're going to go to the R&D Center. We can either click the little helpful shortcut in mission control, or you can go back to the Kerbal Space Center and click it from here. Here is the tech tree. This is what we need to unlock to beat the game. So there are 4 tiers. 1, 2, 3, 4. A general rule of thumb is that the lower tiers are designed to get you to places close to home, so the moons of Kerbin, and the later tiers allow you to get further into the deeper solar system. So we don't really have a choice in terms of which node we unlock first. It has to be light launchers, which costs us 10 science points out of our budget of 57. The next node to unlock should be environmental science. This gives us the Science Junior, which allows you to conduct more science experiments on missions and therefore unlock more science and therefore unlock the tech tree quicker. So this is very, very important. After that, I'd say the probes node is the next most important because that gets you batteries and a solar panel. So you don't have to worry about running out of electricity. After that, we don't have much science left to spend, so just unlock whatever. I decided to unlock lights and utilities here, but really, it doesn't matter. Just spend your points on whatever looks good. We're going to be getting a lot more nodes unlocked after our second flight. As you can see, we have 12 science points left, so we can unlock one more node. I went for introductory construction. Don't know why, just felt like it. After this, we can hit escape and go back to the vehicle assembly building. Rather than designing a new rocket from scratch, we're just going to open up the one we built before. There it is. We are going to make one modification though. We're going to add that Science Junior. So we're going to click the decoupler. That will allow us to remove the entire lower stack. We're going to click on the little Science tab on the left, that little titration flask. Underneath the command pod, we're then going to stick the Science Junior piece on, and then we're going to put the rest of the rocket back on. And there we are. An upgraded version of our Mark 1 rocket. The Science Junior is an environment survey, and thus can be run when landed on the launch pad, during flight, while in the vacuum of space, and then once again once we've landed somewhere else. So this should be by far our most profitable launch yet when it comes to how much science we unlock. Anyway, let's fade across to the launch pad. Before we launch up, the science button is once again flashing, so we're going to click that because, of course, although we've run experiments from the launch pad before, we've never run the Science Junior, so we're still getting some new science here. And then we can press space to launch. So I'm going to leave the rocket at full throttle until our surface velocity reaches 300 meters per second, as indicated by that yellow box to the left of the nav ball. Then we can adjust our throttle to 50% once again. No real reason I went for 50, just seemed like a nice round number. And now we're traveling through the atmosphere. We can run our science experiment once again with that Science Junior. And now we're just going to watch our apoapsis number, or AP number. Your apoapsis is the highest point of your rocket's trajectory. Remember, our mission objective here is to reach space. In Kerbal Space Program 2, the atmosphere ends and space begins at 70 kilometers. So we need our apoapsis to be 70 kilometers or higher. Ideally, maybe 80 kilometers, just to give us a nice amount of room. But I'm also mindful that our fuel is running out. Have a look at the green go button on the bottom right. Above it, you can see our fuel levels of our rocket's first stage, and the only stage that has engines and fuel. Once the methane and oxygen level reaches 0, we'll be out of fuel. And this rocket actually has just enough fuel to get us an apoapsis of about 90 to 100 kilometers. So for this flight, I just let it run out until the booster was completely out of fuel. And of course, this has now happened, so we can just stage and then wait for the point at which we cross the atmospheric border and enter space, where we can start running some more science experiments. And there we go, we had the green pop-up confirming that we had entered space, thus fulfilling the contract that we were tracking. So at this point, I saved. You can do this by pressing F5, or if you want to name your save, you can press escape and save, and then you can give your save whatever name you want. For example's sake, I'm now going to press F9. This will load our most recent quick save, which is the one you just saw me create. If you want to load an earlier save, you can just press escape, load game, and then pick whichever save you want to load. You want a quick save a lot in Kerbal Space Program 2. Right now, the game is still very buggy. So it would be a shame to lose your Kerbals or have your mission be ruined by a bug that was out of your control. Anyway, you might have noticed I pressed the research button whilst we were still in space. We could get that sweet, sweet science, but of course, it's useless to us until we land safely. Now, I staged the parachute, but you might have noticed it didn't deploy right away. Parachutes won't pop out until you're in an atmosphere and traveling at safe speeds. Although, I must say, my parachute did deploy a lot earlier than expected. I don't know if this is a bug or if that's just the normal altitude that this particular parachute deploys at, but there you go. Here you can see a little temperature gauge showing up on the Science Junior because it's bearing the brunt of our re-entry heating, and we so far have no heat shield, which we didn't really need one up until now because we're re-entering the atmosphere at very low speeds. But going forward, a heat shield will be very useful for future missions. So unlocking one on the tech tree is going to be a big priority for us once we've recovered this vessel. And you can see the ground rushing towards us. You'll notice we're actually landing in an area west of where we launched from, even though the rocket just went straight up and straight down. The reason for this is because, of course, Kerbin is a planet, and it rotated underneath us while we were performing our flight. But as you can see, our flight is pretty much over. Just passing through some trees, and there we have it. Safe touchdown of rocket number 2. Before we recover it, though, I'm going to run our science experiments one more time to get some data from our command pod with the Kerbal doing a crew observation, and of course the Science Junior can run its experiments, and then we can get Bill Kerman on EVA to gather another surface sample. Then we can waddle him back over to the command pod, press space to make him jump up to it, F will make him grab onto it, and then B will make him board it, although obviously he has to be over the hatch in order to board. Then we can press escape, remembering to press recover, not revert our vessel. So let's go back to mission control and hand in our mission. And look at that, we have launched a crew capsule out of the atmosphere, putting us neck and neck with Blue Origin after only 12 minutes of our space agency being in business. We also collected 50 science points. Before we go spending them, let's take a look at our next missions. We have reach orbit and land a crew pod in a body of water on Kerbin, which we can do at the end of our next flight. Now let's go to the R&D facility and unlock some more nodes. One thing I really want to get is a more efficient engine for use in space, which is the Terrier engine in orbital rocketry. So we're going to have to unlock the node before it, solid fuel boosters, and then unlock orbital rocketry. We've still got 154 science points remaining, so the next thing we want to get is a heat shield. Do you remember how I mentioned earlier that re-entry heating is going to be something we need to be considerate of? Well, we need to unlock a heat shield, which is in the survivability tab, and so we need to unlock aerodynamics and stability to get to survivability. And to be honest, that's all kind of the really important stuff unlocked now. Now we're just going to be spending points to unlock the rest of Tier 1. Any order will do. I think Mun landing is probably a sensible one to get because you get a slightly bigger fuel tank and you get a more lightweight landing pod, and struts are very useful as well. So if you want to play along with me, unlock Mun landing and struts as the next nodes. Anyway, with that out of the way, it's time to return to the vehicle assembly building, and we can start constructing a brand new rocket for our most ambitious mission yet. So far, it's the same as what we've done before. We've got the command pod, parachute, and Science Junior, but now we're going to navigate to the thermal tab to add a heat shield underneath the Science Junior. Then we can add the decoupler like we did before, and then I'm going to add one FLT 200 fuel tank. This will be the only fuel tank we need for our upper stage. It doesn't look like a lot of fuel, but we're going to use our new engine, the Terrier. The Terrier has much lower thrust to the engine that we've been using before, but it's far more efficient. It will get a lot more mileage out of this fuel tank. The compromise of the Terrier is it doesn't work very well at sea level. It has to work in the upper atmosphere or in the vacuum of space. So for our rocket's first stage, we're going to add 2 FLT 800 tanks and the swivel engine that we've been using before. Don't mix it up with the Reliant engine. That one doesn't have thrust vectoring, so we can't steer our rocket as easily. We want to stick with the swivel engine. For those unfamiliar with the term thrust vectoring basically means the engine can point in different directions so that you can steer your rocket. And it's how rockets like SpaceX's Falcon 9 can steer themselves without needing to use fins. Now, before we launch, I want to just mention something. Up until now, our launches have been pretty trivial, just been going straight up and straight down. But that's no way to get to orbit efficiently. Now, we're going to need to do a gravity turn. This is a photo from SpaceX of a Falcon 9 heading its way to orbit, and it's a great real-life example of what a gravity turn looks like. Perhaps it's somewhat counterintuitive, but getting to orbit is less about increasing your altitude and more about increasing your speed. You essentially need to be traveling so fast that as you fall back to the planet, you never actually hit it. Horrible oversimplification, I know. In real life, you need to be traveling at about 7.8 kilometers per second, or 17,000 miles per hour, in order to achieve stable low Earth orbit. In Kerbal Space Program, you need to be traveling 2,300 meters per second. It's very difficult to build up a lot of speed in the lower atmosphere because of all the air resistance, and you run the risk of overheating due to air friction. So we can do what rockets do in real life. Go straight up initially to get out of the thickest parts of the atmosphere, and then begin turning over gradually, until we reach a point where we're so high up and the air is so thin and the air resistance is so low, then we can start pointing basically horizontal. We can put all of our engines' power towards building our speed. We'll be steering our rocket with the nav ball, that blue thing that we've been basically ignoring up until now. The center of the ball corresponds to where your ship is pointing. So at the moment, we're pointing straight up. You can think of the center of the nav ball as the nose of your ship. Anyway, hit space to initiate our launch countdown. So let's make sure the throttle is set to maximum and we can watch the rocket launch. So for this flight, I'm going to leave the throttle at 100% for simplicity's sake, and we're just going to go straight up at first. I'm not touching any of the controls right now. Once our altitude hits 500, which is about now, we're going to start gradually starting our gravity turn by tapping the D button on the keyboard. Did a little bit of multitasking there with the research tab just to get some science as we go. But back on the subject of doing the gravity turn, you can see the engine twitching. When you see it twitch like that, that corresponds to me tapping the D key. You can also see the green arrow underneath the nav ball flicking to the right whenever I tap the D key. This is like the easiest way to do a gravity turn. Just tapping D gradually like this. I'm aiming to be pointing about 45 degrees by the time we hit 10 kilometers in altitude. Now, this rocket has a pretty balanced thrust to weight ratio. If you're going off script and have designed your own vehicle, generally you don't want your speed to be too high in the lowest parts of the atmosphere because you'll waste a lot of energy fighting the air resistance, and you'll probably generate a bit of thermal heating as well that could put your spacecraft at risk. You don't really want to be going faster than 300 meters per second before 5 kilometers in altitude. But mileage varies, so this is something you can experiment with as you get used to designing your own craft. As you can see, we have passed the 10 kilometer mark. I think I did a pretty good job at making sure the rocket was pointing 45 degrees on the nav ball by the time we passed it. Now I'm tipping over at a much more gradual rate. The next point on the nav ball I'm aiming for is 30 degrees, which I wanted to be hitting at around 25 kilometers. Which again, I think I did a pretty decent job of. From here, we're now just going to start gradually tipping over so we're pointing flat, as we're currently in the very thinnest parts of Kerbin's atmosphere. Now you may have noticed around this point, our first stage is rapidly running out of fuel. So in just a second, we're going to get engine flame out. And there it is. Now we have an apoapsis of 71.8 kilometers right now. So we are going to be reaching space, but of course we need to be reaching orbit. And we are still around 7 kilometers per second short of orbital velocity. But luckily, our second stage has enough fuel to get us there. I activated by first pressing space to trigger the decoupler, and then space again to activate the engine. Now you can see that above the fuel gauge for this stage is a number that's rapidly going down. At the moment it's saying, pause, I can't talk that fast, 739. This is our delta V. Delta means change, V means velocity. So 739 is the meters per second by which we can change our velocity before our fuel runs out. Let's take a look at our orbital speed. Remember, we need to get 2,300 meters per second to reach stable orbit, which means that right now we need to change our velocity by a further 519 meters per second. Well, actually, probably slightly more because no one is that perfect of a pilot. And according to our Delta V budget on our staging panel, we should be able to do it. So let's unpause the video and see if we do. Now we're going to reach orbit in 2 steps. Firstly, I'm raising our apoapsis to 90 kilometers. Just that's a fairly nice round number. Gives us a nice safety margin as well above the 70 kilometer threshold. And there you have it. We have an apoapsis of 90,290 meters. Not completely stable number because we are still in the atmosphere, so there is some drag being acted on the rocket, which in turn is slightly lowering our apoapsis, but not by a meaningful amount. Now we've reached space, so we can run some science experiments, and then we're going to press M to open up the map screen, click on our apoapsis, and press Create Maneuver Plan. That in turn makes this little gizmo pop up that allows us to plan orbital maneuvers, or in this case, our orbital insertion. I'm going to drag on the right-hand vector, that little green crosshair type thing. That's the prograde vector. And as you can see, that in turn makes this yellow circle appear. The yellow circle is what your orbit will look like once you execute the maneuver plan. For circularization, prograde is going to make your orbit increase. Retrograde, its opposite, will decrease your orbit. I'm now going to click the maneuver symbol on SAS control, and as you can see, our spacecraft is now pointing towards a new marker on the nav ball. This is the vector in which you need to fire along in order to conduct that maneuver that we just planned. Now we can just use time warp to skip ahead to the point when we need to do our burn, and then, well, we can press Z to set the throttle to max and do the burn. Now, although we have the delta V required to do this, we are cutting it a bit fine, but I was able to confirm that we would definitely be able to do this burn because the maneuver node planner handily tells you the required amount of delta V, and in this case 490, and we had over 500 meters per second. So this was well within our budget. And look at that, we have confirmation that we have reached orbit because we have fulfilled that tracked mission's objectives. We have an apoapsis of 95 kilometers and a periapsis of 89 kilometers. We haven't really discussed periapsis up until now because we've never been in orbit until now, but periapsis is the lowest point in your orbit, apoapsis is the highest point of your orbit. And if you're not in a stable orbit, apoapsis is just the crest of your trajectory, and your periapsis will be some negative number. Anyway, because we are now in a stable orbit, we can safely leave Bill Kerman in his spacecraft and go back to the Kerbal Space Center. Specifically, mission control, because we can submit the Orbit Kerbin mission, and when we do that, we should get some new missions that we can fulfill right away. Just let Dr. Kerry Kerman do her spiel. Yep, there we are. Thank you, science. 75 science points, and look at that. We have Going Green, which is to run a Science Junior experiment on Kerbin, which we can do after we re-enter the atmosphere and land. And we also have Spacewalking, which is perform an EVA while in Kerbin orbit, which we can do immediately, right? Because we are currently in Kerbin orbit. We also have the buoyancy test mission, which is what we had earlier. So we need to make sure that when we deorbit our spacecraft, we're splashing down in the ocean. We also have a mission that requires us to get into orbit around the Mun, but that's going to have to wait for another launch. Now, we're going to go to the tracking station, find our craft, right-click it, select control, and then you hit M, and now, there we are. We're back in the flight mode, and we can begin setting up our deorbit burn. So there's this big ocean area to the west of where we launch from. So I'm going to create a maneuver node and just drag on retrograde until it says we run out of fuel. As you can see, we've only got 76 meters per second of delta V remaining, which to be honest isn't a lot, but it's plenty enough to perform a deorbit. And don't forget, the reason we're aiming for the ocean here is because we want to fulfill that buoyancy test mission. Speaking of fulfilling missions though, we also need to complete the Going Green mission, which will require us to go on EVA before we do our deorbit burn. So I'm going to mouse over Bill Kerman's face there, click the EVA button, and hey presto, he's now on EVA, thus fulfilling the Going Green contract. Then we can press B to get him aboard the spacecraft once again, and then we can just time accelerate to the point at which we need to start doing our deorbit burn. And there it goes. Now, when it came to planning this and trying to make sure I ended up in the ocean, I didn't really do much in the way of planning. I just made the maneuver plan and sort of guessed what I thought would be a good trajectory to set. A lot of that will probably come down to experience though. So if you're not too sure if you're going to be landing in the ocean or not and fulfilling the buoyancy test mission, either A, don't worry too much, just do another launch that just plops you straight in the ocean. There's no money system in KSP2, so there's no penalties to doing that. Or you can make a quick save before you do your deorbit burn, do it, and if you don't land in the ocean, just do a quick load by pressing F9 and try a different deorbit burn. In KSP, a lot of the fun comes from failure, learning from those failures, and then failing 17 more times until it works. And you know, I almost had to do a quick load as well. Remember I said earlier to do lots of quick saves because of bugs and things like that in KSP2? Well, just watch my parachute. Wait for it. There. It just disappeared. And I don't know why. So I frantically paused the game. I tried repacking the chute and then deploying it. But that didn't do anything because it deployed, but then there was no parachute. But then I miraculously somehow just survived splashdown. I guess I was going just slow enough and the water cushioned our fall enough that we didn't lose the Science Junior heat shield or our capsule. So, don't know. There's a lesson to be learned there. As you can see, I'm just now patiently waiting for us to break through the surface again as we floated back up to the top. There we go. And yeah, we've got all of our missions fulfilled. One more thing to do is to go outside and Bill Kerman can grab a surface sample. I guess it's not a surface sample, is it? It's an ocean sample. And I think it's really funny that Kerbals seem to be able to swim a lot faster than they can walk, which it leads to kind of contributes to the theory that Kerbals are aquatic beings and they all live underwater. Hence why there are no significant buildings on Kerbin aside from the Kerbal Space Center, because they all live under the sea. You know, just a little fan theory that is not original to me. But there you go. Make of that what you will. Now it's time to press escape and recover our vessel. Once again, making sure you don't click revert vessel, you click recover. Then we can go to the KSC. Oh, look at that. It's night time. And we can go to the mission control building and hand in our mission. So we did the buoyancy test. Just spam the continue button. 40 science earned there. Then we can do the going green hand in. And then finally the spacewalk-in mission. And with that, it's time to go back to the tech tree and see what we can unlock. Now at this point, it really doesn't matter a great deal what we unlock next, because now we just want to unlock everything else that's in tier 1. So we've got power launchers and tiny engines are quite expensive, so we can't unlock those yet. So I just unlocked as many nodes as I could with the science that we had, and we can unlock the rest of node 1 with our subsequent missions to the Mun. So if you want to unlock power launchers, you can build bigger rockets, then feel free. It doesn't really matter at this stage. We don't need any additional tech to what we've already got, and our next mission is going to net us enough science to unlock the rest of tier 1 regardless. But anyway, it's time to get ready for our biggest mission yet, Mun or Bust, in which we need to establish orbit around the Mun at an altitude lower than 2,400 kilometers, but higher than 60 kilometers. Kind of a wide range, should be pretty easy. So we're going to go back to the vehicle assembly building and start constructing the beast of a rocket that's going to get us there. Going to be bigger than any of the ones we've built thus far, but we are going to start the same way as all of our previous vehicles. That same capsule, parachute on the top, Science Junior on the bottom, and below that, a heat shield. Then we're going to add the decoupler, and this is where, my friends, things get different. The upper stage is going to be much bigger than before because we need to go a lot further than before. So we're going to use this fuel tank, the biggest one we have so far, the FLT 800. Below it, we're going to add our trusty Terrier engine, and we're not actually done with this stage yet. Because we've got a long journey ahead of us, we don't want to be risking running out of power. So we're going to add 2 additional batteries here, and then we're going to add 4 solar panels, the extra small ones. There we are in 4-way symmetry, so that our batteries will be able to recharge whenever we're in sunlight. And it's good practice to have 4 because then, no matter what orientation your spacecraft is pointing, at least one of the solar panels should be exposed to the sun, provided you're not on the dark side of a planet or moon. Anyway, for the lower stage, we're going to use 3 FLT 800 fuel tanks with a swivel engine underneath. Remember to not use the Reliant engine because the Reliant engine does not have thrust vectoring. Now, as you can see, this rocket is quite the chonkster. Will that single engine actually be powerful enough to get it off the launch pad? Well, we can click the little clipboard icon at the bottom to open our engineer's report, and as you can see, no, it can't. If your thrust-to-weight ratio is less than 1, you're not going to be getting off the ground, and ideally, you actually want it to be just over 1.0, like 1.2 or something. We can actually demonstrate this rocket's ability to not fly on the launch pad. So yes, we definitely need to do something about this. So we're going to navigate to the decouplers panel once again, but this time we're going to use a radial decoupler, and we're going to pop it in 2-way symmetry. Then we're going to go to the engines tab and add a solid fuel booster. There we are. Now, this isn't a very good place for solid fuel boosters. We're going to use the offset tool here to move it down. And then once they're as low as they can possibly go, we're going to offset the decouplers themselves down the stack so that the black nozzles of the solid fuel boosters are just below the level of the central stage. This helps reduce the risk of the boosters hitting the central stage once they detach from the rocket. Then we're going to click the little wing tab on the left to get to our aerodynamic parts, and we're going to add a nose cone to the top of the boosters just to make this rocket more aerodynamic. We're then going to go to the structural tab and add 2 struts. to make sure that the solid rocket boosters are definitely secured to the central stage. Now, one thing we can do to ensure that those boosters definitely cleanly separate once those radial decouplers fire is adding more solid rocket boosters. But this time, teeny tiny ones. These are the Separatron boosters, and they're not designed to be used like the other engines, as in power your rocket. Instead, they're here to help you separate radial parts. And you can see how I've attached them here. The engine nozzles for the Separatrons should point inward so that when they fire, they really push those boosters away from the central stack. Now, up until now, I've not been painting my rockets, but, you know, this feels like a bit of a momentous occasion, right? Let's paint the rocket. I feel like I don't really need to go through like a tutorial with you guys for this, because it's a fairly self-explanatory tool, but you've got a base color, you've got an accent color. And do notice that to the right of the color picker, there is a transparency gauge, and you can actually just have your rocket be made of bare metal if you want by setting both the base and accent colors to transparent. But in this case, I've gone with a nice snazzy orange, white, and blue paint scheme. Now, the only thing left to do is sort out our staging. Up until now, our rockets have been fairly simple, so the staging hasn't really needed sorting out. But here, you can see the game has got it all wrong. It's got those Separatrons firing in the first stage. We need to select those in the staging panel and drag them so that they're in the same stage as the radial decouplers. We do want the two main solid rocket boosters to be in the first stage, but we also want the swivel engine in the first stage as well. Because remember, the swivel is our rocket's means of steering. Those solid rocket boosters do not have thrust vectoring, so we want the swivel engine in the first stage so that we can still steer our rocket in flight. But speaking of flight, that's what we need to do now. So as you can see, we are on the launch pad. I've pressed start the countdown, and we can launch. So as you can see, because those solid rocket boosters are so powerful, we don't need to have our central engine at full throttle. You see, solid rocket boosters, they can't be throttled or switched off or anything like that like the regular engines can. Once they're lit, that's it until they run out of fuel. So our throttle gauge is only controlling our central engine. We still wanted at fairly reasonable thrust because, again, it's here to steer the rocket, but for the initial part of the flight, the vast majority of the thrust is being provided by those solid rocket boosters. I am once again following the flight plan of our last launch, which is to be aiming about 45 degrees on the nav ball by the time we hit 10 kilometers, and there we are. The solid rocket boosters ran out of fuel, so we staged, and the radial decouplers separated at the same time as the Separatron boosters ignited. But now those side boosters have detached, our thrust has gone way down, so now I'm going to throttle our central engine up to full power for the remainder of the ascent. I'm going to carry on tipping the rocket over very slowly. I'm going to be aiming for about 30 degrees on the nav ball again by the time we hit 25 kilometers, although I think for this flight I actually got there a little bit earlier than I wanted. Wasn't the end of the world. We do have a lot of fuel in this stage, but that's something to just be aware of. If you have a look below the nav ball where it says your apoapsis, you can also see how many seconds away we are from our apoapsis. If that number starts going down a bit too fast, you probably want to be pointing a little bit more vertically. If your time to apoapsis is going up, and for example if we're over a minute away from our apoapsis, then that's an indication that you can point closer to the prograde vector, which is the little green crosshair on the nav ball, currently sitting at around 15 degrees. But because I'm only 23 seconds away from apoapsis, we don't want to be following it just yet. 30 degrees will be a nice angle of attack to hold whilst we raise our apoapsis and get it a bit further away from us. But honestly, when it comes to reaching Kerbin orbit, it's all just about practice and experience. So if you're still struggling with reaching orbit, perhaps don't do this mission yet. Just launch a few more things to low Kerbin orbit first, just so you can get a feel for how it works getting rockets to space. Now, I sped the footage up a bit just then, just so we can get to our next milestone. We are now about a minute away from apoapsis, and our altitude is pretty high as well. There's not much air resistance up here, so now I'm just going to basically start flying flat. Because now is the time where we just want to be accelerating forwards in order to reach orbital velocity. So remember, your apoapsis needs to be above 70 kilometers, just so that we've got plenty of room to make maneuver nodes and stuff like that. I'm going to raise it all the way to 100 kilometers. Oh, looks like we've just hit bingo fuel in first stage, so now we're going to press space to stage, and then press space again to fire the Terrier engine, and then we can just keep burning until our apoapsis is 100 kilometers. That's going to give us loads and loads of time to make a maneuver plan in order to circularize our orbit, and you know, 100, it's a nice round number, isn't it? But there we are, our apoapsis is at 100, so now we're just going to wait until we've reached space. One thing I did do was press the hold prograde button on the auto SAS, just because we are technically still in the atmosphere, and this vector will ensure that we cause as little drag as possible. Though really, at the altitude we're at, there's only going to be minimal drag anyway. And there we are now in space. But we're not in orbit yet. Before we plan our maneuver though, I noticed the science notification light was flashing blue, indicating that there are experiments to run. But as you can see, clicking this netted 0 science points. In fact, everything we've done on this flight so far has earned us 0 points, as you can see, because of course we've not done anything on this flight that we haven't done before. We've already done crew observations and Science Junior experiments in Kerbin's atmosphere and in space close to Kerbin on previous flights, and in KSP2 you can't just keep doing the same experiments over and over again. But we can take this as a learning opportunity to learn about transmissions. Science data can be transmitted back to the Kerbal Space Center, so you can get the science rewards before you return. This does cost electric charge though. You can see our electric charge at the top right of the screen dropping while all the data is being beamed back. This is a big reason why having those extra batteries and the solar panels was important. But bear in mind, you don't need to transmit it back if you don't want to. We can just leave it on board the ship, and then when we recover our vessel at the end, we can get the science points then. And we can't transmit samples, obviously. Those always have to be returned, and you always have to recover your vessel to get the science from those. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's press M to open up the map screen and locate our apoapsis. There it is. We can click at our apoapsis point, get that maneuver node gizmo back, and then drag out on that prograde vector until we get to that point where, wait for it, there we go, the point at which your periapsis and apoapsis start to flip sides. That's generally when your orbit's going to be at its most circular. And, you know, it's good practice to try and get your orbits as circular as possible, because although it's not crucial for this mission, future contracts will require specific orbits with relatively high accuracy. Anyway, we have now arrived at the maneuver node, so we can now execute our planned burn and get ourselves circularized. We can open the map screen and watch the blue line slowly start to match the yellow line, which of course was the predicted orbit that we planned using the maneuver node planner. And there we are in low Kerbin orbit with a lot more delta V remaining this time, 2,174 meters per second. And we need a lot of delta V because we haven't got to where we need to go yet. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Kerbal Space Program and orbital mechanics, I guess, then it might be tempting to just point your craft towards the Mun and then just burn towards it, but that's incredibly inefficient. Instead, we're going to set up a Hohmann transfer. So a Hohmann transfer is a kind of elliptical transfer. So what we do is we create a maneuver plan, drag out on the prograde marker, and as you can see on the opposite side of Kerbin, our apoapsis is now raising. We want to raise our apoapsis to the point where it intersects the Mun's orbit. There we are. But obviously, how do we know that the Mun is going to be here when we reach there, basically, or when we reach our apoapsis? Well, what we can do, we can right-click the Mun and press Set as Target. And then, or maybe I've not done a great job intersecting them. There we go. We can see some numbers have appeared. Whoop, crazy camera just there. So we've got 1B and 1A. And 2A and 2B. These are our closest encounters. So our first close encounter and our second close encounter. So our first close encounter, 1A is where we will be, and 1B is where the moon will be. So as you can see, it's way behind us. So we can actually grab the maneuver planner and move it. Whoop. There we go. We can move it by clicking on the center, and actually we just move it to a point where we will get a Mun encounter. And as you can see, if we can zoom in on the Mun, we can actually right-click it and press Focus. And there we have it. Our orbit is going to pass the Mun at a distance of 38 kilometers. Now, let's just double-check our contract, because I personally don't remember what the orbital parameters are that we need. So let's see. It needs to be greater than 60, but lower than 2,400. So it needs to be higher than what's planned out in the on our maneuver planner so far. So let's go back to the tracking station and locate our spacecraft, press Control, and then press M to leave the tracking station, and here we are. So, going back to the Mun, focus. So what we can do, if we grab the maneuver node, we can actually pull on the retrograde vector to lower our apoapsis around Kerbin, which in turn, as you can see, is raising our periapsis at the Mun. So 42, let's go for 100. As we discussed, it's a nice round number. There's 60. So we're now at a good altitude. There we are, 100,000 meters. So I'm going to make a quick save now, and then we can go ahead and start, getting ready to do our burn. So we've made sure we're following the maneuver vector on auto SAS. Then we can press skip to maneuver, or warp to maneuver, I guess. And we can just wait it out. Getting closer. 3, 2, 1. Press Z for max throttle. And off we go. Now, as you can see, it's a pretty long burn, right? So you can actually initiate some time warp during the burn. And look at that. Physics is still running. The engine is still firing. But we're not having to wait as long for the burn to complete. Granted, it was only about a minute long, so it wasn't the longest burn in the world, but some of the burns you'll be doing later in this game, especially when things like Interstellar are added, are going to be substantially longer. Now, just before the burn's done, we're going to drop down to 1 times time warp because there is a delay when you change time warp, so you want to do it just before you need to. And there we are. Oh, just stop, just shy. Let's see if we can get that. Oh, now I've overshot it. Trying to be cocky, but what's our MUN perhaps is 91,000. That's why we like to engineer a little bit of wiggle room with our maneuver plans, just in case you have moments like that. Now what we can do is, where's our orbit? Let's right-click this point of our orbit, left-click, sorry, press time warp to point, and off we go. And as you can see, we'll be encountering the MUN on the way back down towards Kerbin. So, ready? There we go. We're now in the MUN sphere of influence. And we should now have more science that we can do, because we're now in a new sphere of influence. We're in space high above the MUN. So we can click this button here. And look at this. We have now got some science. What does it say? MUN high orbit. And because this is MUN high orbit, that means that there's science you can get from MUN low orbit as well. But we need to get ourselves into low orbit. So let's plan another maneuver. So this time we want to be slowing down, not speeding up. So we're going to make a retrograde maneuver. Here we go. And there we are, just where they swap sides. That's what we want. So 95 there, 86 there. Not perfect, but you know what? It's good enough for me. So then we can just press time warp to the maneuver. And we can actually do a bit of multitasking. Whilst we're doing the burn, we can run our low orbit science. Let's get orientated. And then we can actually activate a little bit of manual time warp because the game won't auto time warp when you're too close. And here we go. And we can open the map screen and there we go. Swapping. Perfect. And it looks like we fulfilled that contract, which is brilliant. But look, we're still in MUN high orbit. So it looks like we need to get a bit lower than this. Where are we? So our periapsis is here. Let's time warp around and see if our periapsis is low enough to get science from low MUN orbit. It is not. We're still in high orbit. So we can actually lower our orbit so we can get some science whilst we're here. Although it's not part of the contract, we've done the contract now, so we can do our own thing. So let's go for, I don't know what exactly low MUN orbit is. So let's just go with 30 kilometers and see. So we've created another retrograde maneuver to get us even closer to the surface of the MUN. We can time warp towards that. Now we're pointing the right way on the nav ball. Can we speed this up a bit? I'm very impatient. Oh, there we go. Doesn't matter, we've overshot a bit. And there we are. Perfect. Our periapsis now is 33. So let's go with that. We'll time warp around. Ah, there we go. That thing's flashing. Yep, we are now in low orbit. So we can run these experiments again. And we're now going to get some extra science. Perfect. So it'd be nice at this point just to double check we have definitely fulfilled the mission parameters. Let's see. Aha, submit. Continue, 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 continue. Gotcha, continue. Yep, over and out. Hooray, 150 science. I feel like a millionaire. Now we have some more missions available. Let's see, the perfect circle. Establish an orbit around Kerbin. Well, we can't do that now, this later on in the mission. What's first dibs? Plant a flag within any mare on the MUN. I'm guessing that's a similar vein here. One small step, land on the surface of the MUN. Well, these will all be good missions to track for our next flight, but I don't think we can really do them on this flight. Oh, I'm getting nagged by the game that something's happening. So let's go back to the tracking station and control our vessel. Press M to go back. So we've kind of done all the things we can do at this point in this mission. Technically speaking, we can do a MUN landing, but we might have enough fuel to get home. Well, we won't have enough fuel to get home. And we've not got any landing legs, so it'd be nice to do a dedicated MUN landing mission. So we're going to leave. We're going to create a maneuver plan. Now, we want to be going backwards out of the MUN's orbit. If we go forwards, we're kind of going with the MUN. We'll end up in an orbit higher than the MUN around Kerbin. We want to be the opposite. We want to be lower. So we're going to make a maneuver on the opposite side. Drag on prograde. As you can see, that creates this little transfer here. And there we are. We're going to actually keep dragging on that until our Kerbin periapsis is low enough to enter the atmosphere, basically. Now, as you can see, at a point, it stops sort of getting low, doesn't it? It starts to spin because, look, we're no longer going backwards. So we'll click the center of the maneuver planner, spin it around so we are still going backwards. And look, our curbing periapsis is now nice and low again. So now we just keep dragging on prograde. What's our periapsis there? So we want it to be, let's go for 30 kilometers. Actually, that's a bit low, isn't it? Let's go with 35. Close enough. We'll make a quick save just in case. And then we'll just time warp to do our maneuver. Let's get pointing the right way first. As you can see, 272 meters per second. So we've got a lot of fuel remaining. This rocket, in retrospect, was way overkill. But hey, it's nice to have a bit of wiggle room. And you can use this as an opportunity to practice kind of other maneuvers whilst you're in space with this amount of fuel remaining. Look at that for a beautiful sunrise. And a 3, and a 2, and a 1, and go. So we'll speed up, but once again, we're going to drop back to 1 times time warp a little bit before we really need to because of that delay. And there we go. What's that? Let's delete the maneuver plan. Okay, perhaps it's 47. So at this point, we're already pointing in the right direction. So let's just do a little burn. Tiny amount of throttle, 33. I'm happy with that. We'll make a quick save just in case, though. Now, we've got one more thing to do that I forgot to do on the way to the Mun, and that is getting science from high Kerbin orbit. Remember how we could get science from low Mun orbit and high Mun orbit? Same applies to Kerbin. In fact, every celestial body. As you can see, we're in high Kerbin orbit. So let's run the experiment again. Beautiful. And now it's just a case of time warping down back to the planet. So here we go. There we are. Now you kind of want to modulate your time warp because can be a bit glitchy sometimes. You might end up time warping through the planet. So yeah, we want to make sure we're going about 1 times time warp at this point so we can stage because we don't need the lower part of our rocket. Make sure pointing retrograde so the heat shield is going to bear the brunt of re-entry. And then we can just time warp down. At this point, I'm going to make a quick save in case we have a parachute bug or anything. And then we can stage the parachute. Won't deploy yet because we're going way too fast and we're way too high. But once we get lower, we can then, that should deploy automatically now. And look at those beautiful re-entry effects, and we are not seeing any temperature gauges, which is good because that means the heat shield is doing its job. We're not overheating. And the parachute has deployed. We are still coming in very hot and fast though, so hopefully it doesn't get destroyed by overheating. Strange visual glitch, but it is still in one piece, so we should be okay. Now, I get a bit nervous about parachutes when using physics time warp, so I'm going to leave the game running at normal speed, 1 times speed. But I'm going to speed the footage up in, editing, so you guys haven't got to watch this descend all the way, because we are still fairly high up. It's going to take a while, especially when the parachute opens. But yeah, not a lot else to see, unfortunately, because we are coming in on the dark side of the planet. Oh no, the parachute's... Uh-oh. Well, we once again hit the water fast. We're 120 meters below sea level, but we have survived. Now, I should say that in the making of this video, because I didn't do it all in one sitting, and since I had this happen the first time in this video, I have reported this back to the developers, and it was a bug. They're looking into parachute bugs. Hopefully by the time you're playing this, it'll have been fixed, or you just don't encounter this yourself. Again, this is just another big reason why doing lots of quick saves is very, very important. Now, there's no need to get Bill out on EVA because we've already gathered science from the oceans of Kerbin at this point. So we're going to press escape, and press recover. There we are. Beautiful. And yep, close. And then we're going to go back to the Kerbal Space Center. Here we are. We have 691 science points. And we haven't even handed in all of our missions. Let's see. Oh no, we did do that, didn't we? I'm an idiot. So we're going to go to R&D Center now and see what we can unlock, which is everything, I guess. We can actually unlock power launch so we get the big parts. And look at that. We are now on tier 2. So we can unlock lots of cool things here. I think, the intention of the game is to unlock the whole of tier 1 first. You don't have to, but I'm just going to do it that way anyway. So there we are. The whole of tier 1 is now unlocked. We have a little bit of science left, 111. But as you can see now, the nodes are going to be far more expensive than what we had before. The most expensive one here was 180. That's less than the cheapest one in tier 2. Look at that. 1,100 science units are needed. And this is the case as you go down the tech tree. Tier 4, 8,000 points for these parts here. So it's going to get exponentially more expensive. But luckily, as we land on other planets and moons and go further and further, we'll get exponentially more science. So, well, I guess there's nothing more that we can unlock in this video, and I think that's a good way. That's a good place to end the video, isn't it? We've been to the Mun, not landed on the Mun, but we've covered the basics of launching, going straight up and straight down. We then managed to get into an orbit, and then we managed to do a Hohmann transfer to get to orbit in another celestial body. So we've managed to do lots of things in this video. So I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it helpful. Was there anything that you felt I could have done a bit better when it comes to explaining it? I've not done a tutorial like this in quite some time, actually, because KSP1, I did my tutorial series many years ago. So I might be a bit out of practice, but I hope this was easy enough to follow along with. If you did enjoy this video, then a like down below is very much appreciated. And if you want to support me on Patreon, like the beautiful names on screen chose to, then you can. There's a link in the description, and there should be a card on screen at the very end of this video that you can click. There should also be 2 video suggestions on screen as well from my channel. Eventually, this is going to be the first episode of a series of tutorials in which we go through and unlock the entire tech tree so you can play along with me. But yeah, that's the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.